Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Rocket Blocks mock interview. This is a really exciting case called Stella's Stardom, and it features a pop star who is making a key decision about whether to spend her time recording a new album or instead going on tour. It's a really great case. It's got market sizing elements, new product launch elements, all wrapped up in it. And today we've got Ashwin Shetty, a Rocket Blocks expert, playing the role of the interviewer. He is an ex-manager from Bain and Company, as well as an ex-director from Deloitte. Playing the role of candidate, we've got Ben Wilson, who is a recent graduate of the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. He was a summer consultant at Parthenon and is currently a director at the specialized consulting firm Alvarez and Marsal. So let's go ahead and jump in.
Hello, Ben. Welcome to the interview. I'm Ashwin, a former Deloitte director and a former Bain manager, and I'll be playing the role of the interviewer on this session today.
Excellent. And Ashwin, this is Ben Wilson, currently director at Alvarez and Marsal, and I will be the interviewee during this mock interview.
Great. Wonderful to meet you, Ben. Are you a fan of pop music, Ben?
A little bit. I probably shouldn't admit to that, but I am.
So this case is about a pop star, right? Stella Harmony, a pop sensation, recognized as one of the successful artists, most successful artists, in fact, in the last 20 years, millions of fans around the world. She's debating two options and she wants your help here. First, she could embark on an 18-month world tour, performing at stadiums across the globe. Alternatively, she could stay at home and write a new album, right? And she would love to, stay at her mansion. She just bought a $50 million mansion and stay at home, write a new album. Now, she knows that you help large companies think through certain strategic decisions. So she would love your help to approach this particular problem.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, certainly very excited to get going on this project. She sounds incredibly successful. So to kind of read it back, it sounds like the primary problem we're trying to solve is whether she should go on tour or do a new album. The tour being 18 months long, and this is for Stella Harmony. Sounds like incredibly successful the last 20 years, not just in terms of pop artists, but in terms of being able to monetize that success. And that tour would be 18 months versus, not necessarily a time frame established for the album. Ashwin, in looking at this, I certainly have a few initial questions I'd like to gauge with yourself. In terms of Stella's goal, does she have kind of a set goal in mind? Is it, financial security? Is it engaging with the fans? Is it something else? Trying to understand where her mind's at during this.
Yeah, short term, Ben, she would love to make a lot of money. She's in fact set her sights on a $200 million mansion, right? So maximizing money over the short term is one goal of hers. She's right now in early 30s. She has a long career in front of her. She would love to have a successful and productive long career, right? And third thing I would say is, having met her, what I understand is she truly loves her fans and she wants to give them what they want.
Okay, excellent, excellent. A lot to work with there. Certainly some dynamics in our
Yes.
goal, but fantastic to understand. Certainly another question that was coming through my mind was the economics of it, because I know probably the economics have changed over time, especially for streaming. And I know that streaming, can either be a cost per song or perhaps you just buy a whole bundle of the songs altogether. Do you have any understanding how that works out?
Yeah. So a one stream nets an artist typically around $0.005. Most streamed songs can hit around 1 to 2 billion streams. And globally, around 80 million physical albums were sold in 2021. So I think these are some of the rough numbers maybe you can work with while looking at the revenue she can generate or money she can generate through, let's say, producing a new album.
Amazing. Okay. Certainly more physical albums still being sold than I expected, but fantastic to hear that. Okay. And then certainly another area that I was trying to investigate, while you were reading off the introduction, was the historical monetization that Stella Harmony has been able to accomplish. It sounds like she's been very successful in this field, but has she been touring lately? Has she been streaming a lot lately? And how perhaps that's divided, if we know?
Yeah, so She toured last 6 years back, right? So 6 years back, she had a tour. It lasted around 12 months. Quite a successful tour. Um, she was able to sell individual tickets for around $200 per person. Premium tickets were priced at $500. So today, I would say she's more successful and more popular compared to what she was 6 years ago. In terms of album, her last music album came out 2 years back. I would say that was the most or one of the most streamed albums on Spotify for 90 days after launch, right? So you can assume that it hit around 1 to 2 billion streams in the 90 days after launch.
Wow. Okay. So incredibly successful. Okay. That's very good to know, especially as we, consider potential ticket prices downstream.
Yeah.
Um, and Ashwin, certainly one last question. I've been asking a lot about, professional goals and professional historical performances, but has Stella given us any kind of personal interest, personal references to what her preferences might be?
As I said, I mean, I talked about the objectives. I talked about she would love to make more money. She would love to have a long and productive career. She truly cares about her fans. I think so, Ben, I think she's also conflicted, and that's why she wants her help, right? Certain decisions might make her more money, but I think there is also other aspects that she wants to consider. For example, growth, right? Growth as an artist. For example, creating a music album is also an outlet for her. So all these factors are something which come into play when she's thinking about this particular decision.
Excellent, excellent. This is certainly fantastic. If I could have, perhaps a minute or two to kind of gather my thoughts and think about the approach, and then come back to you and kind of discuss how I might want to look at this problem in more detail.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, Ashwin, I think I
Yeah,
certainly have a initial starting approach. And so the way I want to look at this is kind of almost in a matrix style, this or that approach. So I want to look at, if Stella Harmony tours versus if she builds the album. And I want to look at this in terms of financial considerations, primarily in the short term, brand image, and then also intangible costs. And one thing I'm certainly going to make sure I stay away from during this is any revenue or cost or anything that would stay the same between them. So perhaps old album sales, old streaming might have a boost, but it probably would have an immaterial boost between the two options when she starts going on tour or builds a new album. So I'm certainly going to ignore them throughout this.
yeah,
I'll certainly start in terms of financial considerations for the tour. And I want to look at this in terms of revenue and cost. From a revenue perspective, I want to look at this initially in terms of the number of venues or shows that she is going to put on. So how many on a per week basis, and then how many does that intend to go over the whole 18 months? I also want to look at tickets sold, and this is probably going to be primarily a factor in terms of the venue size. And then also the price per ticket. You had referenced earlier, and we had this individual and premium style of 200, 500, but perhaps that cost is going to increase given that she's more popular now. I also want to look at this in terms of add-on products. So I guess, albums sold, whether that's physical merchandise that she can sell while she's on tour at the tour venue, and then also potential sponsors of the tour. Can we get some big companies to actually put in a little money, and we put up, banners and, brand them throughout. Then from the cost side of the tour for financial considerations, we looked at this in terms of fixed and variable. From a fixed perspective, we have the venue, we have the hotels, transport, insurance, marketing. So big expenditures just throughout. But then from the variable costs, I imagine a large portion of this is going to be labor, either for setup and tear down at the different venues, concessions, security. I now want to move over and compare this to financial considerations for the album. So again, same thing broken down in terms of revenue and costs. From a revenue perspective, what's the price per stream? So we know that is about $0.005 per stream. So how did that then scale as we have more songs from this album? I also want to look at the royalties paid, whether that's going to necessarily factor in as well for Stella. And then physical album sales. That was something I was certainly surprised about, was quite a large number. Now, in terms of cost side of the album. So in terms of fixed costs, there's going to be probably huge costs in terms of studio rental, the producers, manufacturing the album, marketing as well. Maybe we have to pay a management fee too. And then from a variable cost side, probably very similar. We're going to have royalties to the writers, featured artists on it, studio equipment, distribution that we might have to rent out. So that's kind of like financial considerations across both ends. I also now want to jump down to brand image and how that might differ between the options. In terms of brand image for the tour, it's the opportunity to really expand internationally for better. Can we grab more fan base as we do this? Can we engage with the fan base even better, which was something Stella had brought up previously. And then there's also a downside to this. Could it be overexposure? She's no longer as luxurious. She toured 6 years ago. Maybe we're just going to have too much exposure. But comparing this to brand image for the album's really interesting because it could refresh her image. It could bring about more notoriety in the larger market, but it could also jeopardize her if it expands too far off what people know her for. I'm a big Ed Sheeran fan. I know Ed Sheeran was certainly hit with some of this early on. His album that was a very different sound. So a lot of the fan base initially weren't as receptive to that as they probably could have been. And then finally, to finish it off, intangible costs. So these intangible things from the tour, it's 18 months. I have to imagine your physical health, your mental health will really take a toll. And then looking at this from the album, it's a stress from a new release, expectations, like we said, from the fans. So those really kind of like 3 increments of financial consideration, brand image, intangible costs, really how I want to look at these. But, I think I really want to start with financial consideration, given that that's probably going to have a big driver in terms of Stella wanting that kind of like maximize short-term value. Have they given us any considerations or any information regarding that currently?
Got it. No, I like the structural articulation, Ben. Thanks for that. I like the prioritization of the financial assessment as well as the 2 other criteria that you bring in. I'm curious over here. When you talk of brand and image for Stella, right? How would you analyze whether either a touring might enhance a brand or let's say production of a music album would enhance a brand? How would you think through that specific question?
Yeah, so and just to clarify, you're asking brand image in terms of those 2 options, whether it would enhance or decline it.
Absolutely right. That's right.
Yeah, it's a great question. I know there's a number of consulting firms that specifically focus on brand. L2 was one that certainly comes to mind. Gartner does it as well. So it'd be really interesting to gauge across their weighted metrics to see what we should be focusing on and how we would certainly rank that. If I had to think about like how I would personally rank that, I'd want to be able to survey a lot of our fan base, material number before and after. I'd also want to gauge in terms of chat rooms and websites where we're really promoting how that is being ranked as well. Is it a positive sentiment? Is it a negative sentiment kind of over time? And then as well, you can probably look at in terms of financial growth afterward. I imagine there's going to be, a time frame where you have to wait, maybe a very short time frame where people are still very excited. But over the long term, are we still able to have financial success after, say, this album or this tour, like we were able to the last album and the last tour 6 years ago? So how do we trend after 6 months? Are we trending the same? Are we even more successful? Or is it really declining? We're seeing a negative sentiment in our fan base.
Got it. Got it. Great. Great. Ben. Thanks a lot for that, insight and that analysis. Now, in terms of, financial analysis that you wanted to make, what could make more money for Stella? Is it touring or is it production of a music album? Right. So let's start with touring. So how would you estimate, right, how much profits Stella could make in an 18-month tour? What are the factors that you would consider in terms of revenue as well as in terms of cost aspects?
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. So I'd want to focus on one at a time. So let me focus on perhaps revenue first for this market size. So I'd want to look at on a per show basis. I imagine the revenue is going to be a factor of the number of shows. So how many shows is she doing? The number of tickets sold per show. So that really kind of that venue size is a factor. I also want to multiply that by the revenue per ticket and how we're going to divide that out. I know we referenced individual and premium earlier. And then I also want to add other revenue options, the other revenue options being the merchandise and the album sales. So perhaps I can start breaking each of those down.
Good.
So,
I think that's good. I think we can start through those 4 factors that you've just listed. Now, in terms of the number of shows, what I can tell you is that Stella makes it look effortless, but actually it's quite physically and emotionally demanding, right? So in a show, for example, you have to remember the lines, you have to sing, you have to dance, engage with your fans. It's not easy, right? So I would say she can perhaps do 3 to 4 shows a week, but not more than that.
okay, excellent. That's fantastic to know. And so in terms of that kind of 3 to 4 shows per week, what I'd want to do is probably average that to about 3.5. We'll see how that comes out at the end of the calculation, because of course you can't have a half a show.
Yeah.
And so understanding that we have 18-month tour, probably roughly 4 weeks per month. So that would give us 72 weeks. And so some months are longer, some are shorter, but we'll kind of like skew on the longer end. So, what I'm going to use is about 75 weeks for this tour starting out.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do is 75 weeks times 3.5 shows per week, that 3.5 average that we had referenced. And that is, so I know 75 times 3 is 225. I know 75, half of that is 37.5. So that's going to be 262.5 shows over the total time. Now, again, to my earlier point, and of course, naturally, we cannot have a half a show. I would say that also feels high, and that's probably for me rounding up. So what I'd like to use is about 260 shows that she might have. How does that sound to yourself in terms of?
Yeah, that's fine. That makes sense.
Excellent. Okay, so that gives me the first piece of that equation, the number of shows. I also now want to move on to number of tickets sold. So in terms of numbers of tickets sold all on a per show basis, I want to look at, so I know probably as a benchmark, average size of a football stadium in the US, which is probably going to be on the larger end, is about 60 to 70,000 seats. Now, again, America, we tend to be a little over the top with our stadium sizes. So I imagine that as Stella performs internationally, and across these many different stadiums of different sizes, I imagine probably something a little smaller, maybe on average about 50,000 seats. And she's a big time artist. So I imagine vast majority is going to be 100% filled out. I'm thinking like a Beyonce and Taylor Swift tour. Like you're always scrambling to get those tickets. Is that 50,000 kind of a good average?
That's about right, Ben. You can assume 50,000
Okay.
tickets sold per show.
Excellent. Excellent. And so now I want to look at ticket revenue. So you had referenced earlier the kind of 2 tickets approach, so the individual and premium. The individual at the time was about 200, and then the premium was about 500. But we said that we could probably bump up those ticket prices. I also imagine in terms of if we had to gauge the premium versus individual, I can certainly take a benchmark at understanding what that split is, but have they given us any kind of information to understand what that split in individual premium seats as a percentage might be?
Yeah, so typically it's 80-20, right? 80% of the seats is basic seats, normal seats, and 20% are premium seats. That's what we see with a lot of pop artists.
Okay, excellent. That really helps a lot. So understanding if we run with the 50,000 seats, that 80% individual would be about 40,000 seats, and then that kind of 20% premium would be the additional 10,000 seats in the stadium. Okay. And so then using those ticket prices previously, 200, 300, what I want to do is start gauging how much more we can price those up. And I imagine that if we think about the individual seats, probably far more price conscious consumers, still crazy fans, still want to go, but aren't going to be paying, a substantial amount more. I'm thinking about maybe $100 more, so about $300 per ticket. Does that sound, about right for yourself?
That makes sense. You can assume 300.
Okay. Then the premium, and I know, I'm living in Chicago. Beyonce just came back through. I knew some of those prices were just, out of the roof. I imagine these consumers for premium seats might be willing to spend a considerable amount more. And, if I had to benchmark how much more, I'd want to say probably something in the world of like $1,000 a ticket. So something, double the price of that previous 500. How does that kind of sound for yourself?
Yeah, so you're right, Ben. I think there will be a lot of VIPs attending Stella shows, and they will be paying a lot more money. So I think $1,000 seems about right. You can assume $1,000 to be the price for the premium seat.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so now let me kind of put that together. So we have the $300 individual seat times 40,000 individual seats altogether. 3 times 4 is 12. So that's going to be 12 million once you add on the zeros. And I want to add that 12 million onto the $1,000 per premium seat times 10,000 premium chairs. And that is going to be, back on the zeros, that's going to be 10 million. So what we're going to have is $12 million from individual seats plus 10 million for premium seats. And that naturally gives me $22 million per show for the revenue from tickets. Okay.
Okay.
And what I want to do is, before I calculate perhaps the additional revenue options to the side, I might want to use a percentage of this. What I want to do is the full revenue for all those shows, because we had calculated having roughly 260 shows. So that's going to be $22 million per show from tickets times the 260 shows altogether collectively. I know 22, I'm just going to cut this down into pieces. 22 times 200, that is going to be 4.4 billion. 22 times 60, that's going to be 132, so 1.32 billion. So I'm just going to add those two up. Basically, what I'm doing is just breaking down that 260 to 260. So that's 4.4 billion plus 1.32 billion. That gives me, about 5.7 billion, and kind of knocking off that last two.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. Okay, so we're at 5.7 billion for revenue from shows. Huge number. Okay, additional revenue. Let's finish this one out before we get to cost. I imagine in terms of additional revenue options like merchandise, the physical albums that you might be able to sell while you're on the tour, other little pieces that fans might want to engage with. I imagine it's not going to be a huge chunk, but certainly something you want to add. I would assume something around the ballpark of like 10% of fans would buy items, and maybe their basket size is around like $100 each. So not extreme, but certainly a fraction, a third of an individual ticket. If you're premium, it's a 10% of that. Does that seem right for yourself?
Yeah, I think that seems right, Ben. In fact, it used to be lower earlier. So what we have done now is Stella has added a lot of merchandise. For example, she's selling candles, she's selling backpacks, she's selling cups, branded cups, bottles even. So I think that's gradually going up, but $100 seems about right, right? And 10% buying the merchandise seems about right.
Okay, excellent. Wow, good for her for some candles and backpacks. I would not have expected that. Okay. So if we have to finish up that math, it's 10% of fans for those 50,000 stadium seats. That's about 5,000 fans that are going to buy at $100 per basket size. So that gives us $500,000 per show. So now I'm going to multiply the $500,000 per show times the 260 shows that we calculated earlier. 26 and 5. So that's going to give me 130 million in revenue additional, which, because I've got everything in billions, I'm just going to put in billions. So to kind of get a collective number, that gives me $5.7 billion plus 0.13 billion in additional revenue. So that's going to give me about $5.8 billion collectively.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Huge number. And kind of where I'm at right now, I want to gauge, to your earlier question, understanding the profit of this. I want to get an understanding of the cost side, and so that's kind of like where I'm aiming next.
Yeah. So in terms of costs, why don't you tell me what could be the key cost categories over here, right? If she were to tour, what will be the key cost categories, and perhaps then we can take a particular gross margin over here.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So the initial costs, and kind of looking back to my framework as well that I used, I'm thinking the production costs. I'm thinking that's a stage setup, that's tear down, lighting, that's sound. So a lot of kind of behind the scenes going on. A lot of travel and hotel. So not just the bus between, but also then the flights, the hotels for everyone that's traveling with you. I imagine there's probably going to be a salary consideration for your crew, for your performers, whether that be dancers, backup singers, and then probably big cost for insurance and marketing. What if someone gets injured? What if someone kind of hurts themselves as well? So does that kind of sound like a good spectrum of costs that I'm thinking about?
I think that's reasonable, Ben. I think you've covered a lot of cost elements that Stella will bear when she tours, right? And what would be your kind of assumption if you have to take an assumption that the kind of gross profit that she could be making if she's touring, considering all the costs that you've listed?
Yeah, great question. So, I know that some of these costs can be considerably high, others quite small. Maybe labor costs we're paying on an hourly basis versus, insurance, marketing is probably going to be fixed and quite large. I would imagine something along, 50% to 70% of revenue, 50% to 70% of what we make. And so probably averaging somewhere around 60% of the revenue initially, before we kind of factor in maybe other costs that I wasn't necessarily thinking about, like, taxes, manager, label, agent, so on. How does that kind of sound for yourself?
That sounds okay. Then you can take 60% here.
Okay, so let's do that math then. So we got the 5.8 billion that we calculated from the revenue previously, times 60%. So what I'm going to do is drop that to 10%, multiply by 6. So I've got $5.8 billion times 10%. That gives me 580 million, just dropping a decimal point. And then I want to multiply that 580 by 6 to do the full 60%. That is going to be $3.48 billion. And if it's okay with you, can I round that to 3.5 billion?
Yeah, that's fine.
Excellent. Okay. So that gives me 3.5 billion. And that's, my primary contribution margin. But I know I'd referenced kind of like taxes, manager, agent as well. Is it okay if I kind of estimate that as a percent perhaps as well of that 5.8 billion? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
the 3.5.
Yeah, you can.
Excellent. Okay. And so looking at that, and apologies, so I calculated the 60% of 3.5 billion. What I want to do is subtract that from 5.8 before I calculate this 30%. So let me do that. So we have the 5.8 billion revenue that we calculated, subtract the 3.5 billion, which is the 60% of costs.
Yeah.
And that gives me $2.3 billion contribution margin. Okay. Now what I want to do is estimate what that is when I cut out costs for the taxes, probably manager, agent, label. I want to imagine something around 30% because I imagine taxes are probably around 20 to 25 throughout this. And then, your agent's probably getting something around less than 10%, probably similar with manager as well. So probably somewhere around that range of 30%.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. And so to avoid the mistake I made last time where I, used the 60% and thought that was acceptable, because I'm estimating those costs at 30%, I'm going to multiply my 2.3 billion by 70%. And that number should give me whatever is the kind of leftover profit in this case for Stella. So 2.3 billion times 70%. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drop it to 10% and then multiply by 7. So 2.3 billion times 10% is 230 million, just dropping a decimal place. Now the 230 million times 7, so really just 23 times 7, and add those zeros back on. That is going to give me 1.6 billion. So what I'm calculating right now is that the tour after the revenue and cost to get the profit is going to leave Stella $1.6 billion in leftover profit, which huge return, especially to that initial goal of trying to maximize her short-term revenue. Does that sound like a pretty accurate number to yourself?
Yeah, that sounds fine, Ben. I think Stella will be very happy listening to this number. We'll have to see will we be able to convert that, but I think she can, right? She's very popular now, and fans have been eagerly waiting for her tour. So I'm sure she'll be able to generate this amount of money.
Excellent. Okay. But certainly, what I'm thinking about on the side is how this potentially compares to the album. So certainly what I'd want to do perhaps next is kind of gauge, what is that profit that you get from the album, and then doing a comparison. How does that sound to yourself?
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that.
Okay, excellent. So in terms of understanding the revenue that can come from the album, I expect this to be probably a bit lower, but I'd also expect our costs to be considerably lower too. So I'm curious if that's going to kind of pan out as my initial hypothesis looking forward. And so my approach, what I'm thinking about is I want to do the number of streams that she can accumulate. So how many songs of hers are going to be streamed on like the Spotify's, Apple Music. I want to multiply that by the revenue per stream, which I know we said was about $0.005, but certainly want to just kind of get that there as calculation. And then I probably also want to add the number of albums sold and then any additional revenue like we did before. How does that kind of sound in terms of getting a direction?
That makes sense, Ben.
Excellent. Okay. So let's kind of break each of those down then. And I want to look at number of streams first. And so you had referenced she's a kind of top global artist. I imagine she has similar success as a Beyonce, as like a Taylor Swift, as an Adele. And you would also reference something along the lines of her top hits being, anywhere or anyone's being, 1 to 2 billion streams. So again, I'd probably want to take an average of that, similar to the averages I was taking previously with those kind of 3 to 4 shows for touring. And I want to look at perhaps she can estimate about 1.5 billion streams. Does that sound, like a fairly accurate ballpark?
I think that's a good ballpark to take. Right. So you can
Okay.
assume per album, I think that will be multiple songs, but let's assume per album gets streamed 1.5 billion times, right? So each stream she will make $0.005.
Okay, excellent. And so that gives me then my certainly next piece, which is revenue per song. So 0.005 per song. So let me calculate that out to give me that initial kind of two pieces of my equation. So I want to do 1.5 billion streams. I want to multiply that by $0.005 per stream. So I know that's going to be, break this down, 1.5 billion times 0.001. That's going to be 1.5 million. But then I want to multiply that by 5. I'm just breaking down that 0.005 into two parts. So 1.5 million, and that's going to be times 5. So then that's easy enough, 7.5 million. So I know that my first half of the equation is going to be $7.5 million for the album streams, which, if I'm taking a step back real quick, I'm already seeing that's considerably lower than the billion Stella is making. So I'm hoping that albums sold and additional revenue perhaps bump that number up considerably. But that's kind of my initial reaction to it.
Okay.
Okay. Now I want to look at albums sold. And so in terms of albums sold, I want to assume that, perhaps she's going to sell about maybe 500,000 to 1 million albums. She's a top artist, so perhaps we can skew a bit higher towards the 1 million albums. Is that kind of, a good range that we should be thinking for a top artist like Stella?
Yeah, that's a good assumption to make for Stella.
Okay. I'm gonna be honest with you, Ashwin. It's been a while since I've bought a physical album. So, I imagine it still probably is a bit of a high cost to produce the album. So probably need to be a bit higher in terms of price as well. And I can't imagine we're getting the economies of scale from putting out so many of them. I'd imagine typical albums sell around $20 per album. Is that, a fair and accurate measure?
That's a reasonable assumption to make here, Ben. And you're right. That's where it's priced around.
Okay, excellent. So then if I'm going to do for the kind of album sold, 1 million albums times $20 per album, that gives me an additional $20 million for albums sold. Not the huge push that we wanted towards that 1.6 billion, but we certainly have one more factor to go, which is the additional revenue. Maybe people are going to be buying a whole lot of merch. I don't think it's going to get us there. Okay, but additional revenue. I want to use similar assumptions that we did on the prior estimate, where we were saying, probably about 10% fans when they go on tour will buy merchandise. I imagine maybe similar 10% of fans will buy merch for the album, and just kind of continuing with that same assumption. And if we went with that assumption, certainly would be much lower. Before I dive in, does that seem fair?
That seems okay, Ben. I think you can use that assumption for additional revenue, right, to get the overall revenue she will make from the music album production.
Excellent. Okay. And so if we say that's the case, then so I know I'm just going to add up all these pieces now that we've had. So we have the 7.5 million for revenue from streaming, with $20 million from the additional album sales, and then in terms of that gives me $27.5 million from songs. And so then if I take the 10% on top of 27.5 million, that gives me 2.75 million for additional revenue. So, you can call that, roughly $3 million. Where that gets me is, about $30 million in total for revenue from album sales, which again, before you even factored in the costs associated with this, which again will be lower, it's nowhere near the $1.6 billion in profit. But just to get a fair and accurate estimate, what I'd like to do next is probably calculate the cost side of this, roughly $30 million.
Yeah. So I think let's leave out the cost side, right? Because as you rightly pointed out, that the revenue that Stella makes from music album production is much lower than what she's making touring, right? So let's ignore the cost analysis for now, and let's move on to the other question, right? Because you have looked at the financial analysis of both, right? Both options, which is touring and producing a music album. So from a financial perspective, what's your initial synthesis?
I'm sorry, Ashwin. I don't think I heard you correctly. Can you help me? What was that question?
Yeah, my question was, Ben, from a financial perspective, what's your initial synthesis between the two options?
Yeah, financial synthesis is, this $30 million in only revenue for the album versus 1.6 billion in profit for the actual tour. I am very much skewing towards the tour, and I know one of the first things I think Stella had kind of a three-part goal, but one of
Yeah,
her real big goals was she wants to create financial success in the short term. So short term, it seems like that is certainly the direction to go. I am fully biased in that way.
got it. Great. Other than the financial aspect, right? What are the other potential benefits to a tour? Are there any potential risks that Stella should consider if she chooses touring as an option?
Yeah, certainly quite a few. So, I want to look at this in terms of benefits and risks of that tour. And so in benefits, I'm going to certainly steal a few back and then go into deeper detail from my framework. First one I'm thinking
Hmm.
about is brand. So from Stella's brand, it's greater exposure globally. So she'll be able to engage and interact with the fans, which is fantastic. And that's something that she certainly referenced in her primary goal. And I know, again, I'm going to keep making analogies to artists that I follow. Taylor Swift does a great job engaging with fans while she's on tour, kind of giving them special experiences and events. And that certainly builds up her customer base, which then, of course, works into her long-term financial success. So I'm thinking a brand piece. But I'm also thinking personally. She gets to go out and see the world. She gets to see, travel, have these very unique personal experiences as well. That if she was back home, probably in her fairly large mansion, just building an album, she wouldn't get to. So that's certainly something that gets to broaden her horizons personally. And then, in terms of the risk side, I want to think about whether these costs could grow. Now, I took a very rough assumption at about a 50 to 70% cost, and then 30% for additional like managers, agents, taxes. But those could certainly grow considerably. And I've heard from a lot of people who used to be in the music industry that tours can actually end up being unprofitable if not done in large scale. And so I'd want to get a better understanding of whether those costs truly could and whether that 1.6 billion is just simply inflated in terms of potential profit.
Yeah,
Um, there's also this kind of other side to brand where, I'd referenced in the framework, maybe we're providing too much exposure for Stella. Maybe it's no longer such a luxurious item to get a ticket or to go to a concert if she's doing too many tours over this kind of 18-month time frame. So maybe that impacts her financial success in the future. And then, what I'm thinking of last is that health and safety. Not just from the 18-month tour, but if you're doing all these tours, do we have to worry about potential safety concerns for her with fans that might be going over the top or a little crazy as well? And how much security is then going to factor in? I know we referenced it, but it was kind of offhanded, and whether we really need to double down on that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about in terms of initial benefits and risks to this tour outside of financial considerations.
got it. Great, great, Ben. So, what's your final recommend to Stella? So, what would you tell her if you meet her?
Yeah. So, in terms of a goal of whether or not Stella Harmony should pursue her 18-month tour or build a new album, my recommendation is giving the tremendous upside of the $1.6 billion take home to pursue the tour right now. And that's, in comparison to only about $30 million revenue. So, certainly huge upside. There's a number of risks with this, which we had referenced. So, she wants a longer term career, but a focus on short term earnings, and those usually kind of go in different directions. And this could impact her long term gains in health in terms of going on the tour. We can certainly look at mitigation options. So, Stella needs, a structured schedule probably with breaks, in terms of identifying how to make sure this is done long term. And I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive. So perhaps she can also start to build a new album while she is on tour. But in terms of immediate next steps, we would love to help Stella in optimizing her tour approach and making sure that she can capitalize on this market-sized revenue and profitability opportunity that we've assessed today.
Great, Ben. So lovely. Thanks a lot for your time. And look forward to having you in future rounds. Thanks a lot.
Hey everyone, it's Kenton Koveski here, the founder of Rocket Blocks. Thank you so much for watching this mock interview video. I hope you found it informative and helpful as you are getting ready to prepare for your own interviews and hopefully landing that job offer you are excited about. We have a ton of great content on the Rocket Blocks channel coming out on a weekly basis, mock interviews, mini lessons and chats with our Rocket Blocks experts. So if you haven't subscribed yet already, please do so. There is a big red button below. And if you hit that, you'll get all of our content as soon as it comes out. Thanks for watching and have a great day.